It is so hard for me to imagine any parent wanting to hurt their own child.
Her mother, she was abusive growing up. She made her think she had all these illnesses like having cancer, not being able to walk.
It's a controversial syndrome known as Munchausen by proxy.
While researching this video, I came across a story that shocked me. A mother who was a licensed respiratory therapist convinced doctors that her perfectly healthy 3-year-old couldn't breathe on her own.
Not only did she know the language to use, but she also knew what kind of symptoms to report to steer the doctors towards a particular diagnosis. And so she actually, when she was quite young, at one point had a tracheotomy, so a hole in her throat, attached to a breathing machine 23 hours a day. The child had no medical problem. The mother was so convincing that the clinicians believed her.
That was a real case of Munchausen by proxy, a form of child abuse where a parent lies about their child being sick, or in some cases even makes them sick on purpose. It's the kind of story that makes you question everything you know about the human psyche. A parent, someone who is supposed to protect their child, instead becoming the source of their pain. And we will come back to that story of what happened to the little girl later in the video, but first, we're gonna try and understand what Munchausen by proxy is. Or at least try and answer the question everyone wants to know: what would drive a mother, and it's usually mothers, by the way, to do this to their child? While you might know it as Munchausen by proxy, its official name in Australia is fabricated or induced illness by carers. It's also known as factitious disorder imposed on another in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Because the original term Munchausen by proxy remains the name that most of you are familiar with, and frankly, it's easier to say, that's the term I'll use during this video. Okay, before we get into why parents knowingly harm their own children, let's first start with the name itself. It was first coined back in 1977 by this British doctor named Roy Meadow. Yes, Meadow, not Munchausen. I should probably note that Roy Meadow was pretty controversial, and at one point he was even found guilty of serious professional misconduct. But back to the Munchausen's by proxy name. Meadow named it as an extension of Munchausen syndrome, which itself was coined back in 1951 to refer to people who lied about a medical illness in themselves. And the doctor who named that was Richard Asher, also not Munchausen. So where does Munchausen come from? Well, for that we have to go back in time to 1700s Germany to meet Baron Munchausen. He was a real person who was later fictionalized in a novel. He was known for telling exaggerated stories. Stories like traveling to the moon and fighting 40-foot-long crocodiles. The name Munchausen comes from that telling of tall tales. And while no one's going to believe a story about wrestling a 40-foot-long crocodile, unfortunately, people do believe the lies that parents tell in cases of Munchausen by proxy, and the consequences of that can be devastating. Okay, so the history part is over. Let's get into the psychology of these cases of Munchausen by proxy. What drives these parents to harm their children? There isn't really one answer, but research suggests parents tend to get some kind of perverse gratification from harming their children, either in a sadistic way or, more commonly, from the interaction with the medical system. It's almost as if the parents have an addiction to the medical setting. Some take pleasure in outsmarting doctors, but more often the gratification comes from being seen as a caring parent. When researchers look into the backgrounds of these parents, there are 3 patterns that really stand out. One is sadly that a lot of them have experienced abuse themselves as children. Secondly, many of those who exhibit these behaviors have also lied about their own health before. And finally, often, but not always, they have some sort of medical background themselves. Just like that mother who I first told you about, who used her medical knowledge to convince doctors to give her daughter a tracheotomy. So yes, perpetrators often share these background traits, but there's usually something else going on as well. Very often, they're also living with a personality disorder. That could be something like borderline personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder. And usually that's combined with antisocial and anxious traits. Rightly or wrongly, these kinds of cases captivate the public imagination. But there's only limited research about Munchausen by proxy. That's mostly because the people who commit this type of child abuse are master deceivers. So all researchers can do is ask doctors, how many cases of Munchausen by proxy do you know you've seen? So that means we only know about the people who have been caught.
I think the best way of thinking about it is that in a big paediatric centre, one of the major capital city children's hospitals, it would be on average maybe 1 or 2 cases a year.
What's more concerning is that even when these perpetrators are caught and treated, many will relapse, managing to fool the medical system all over again.
We think of this kind of abuse as something that happens between usually the mother and the child, but there's a third party in every case, and that's the medical system. And in every case of this kind of abuse, the medical system has got things wrong.
Now, that's not to downplay how difficult it is to be a doctor. They're trying to make the right calls, especially when they're dealing with children who might have rare or complex medical conditions. But if we want to prevent this kind of abuse, the experts we interviewed said it has to start with medical professionals practicing what they call respectful skepticism. They said doctors should ask themselves these 3 questions. Does the case not make sense medically? Are there multiple children in the family with similar symptoms that don't appear to be genetic? And finally, have you ever seen this parent lie before? Certain crimes can become a fascination for the public, and Munchausen by proxy has certainly become one of those crimes.
I mean, I think it taps a similar, fascination people might have with serial killers. Are they evil or are they damaged? Are they both? Like, how do you categorize that? How do you process that?
Now, I want to end this video where it started, with that little girl with the hole in her throat. By the time she was 10, she was back with her mother, who had now convinced her that she was deaf and needed a wheelchair. But once again, there was nothing medically wrong with her. It's hard to even imagine how her mother got away with it. Not once, but twice. But luckily, her mother was caught after this, and the child was placed in a loving foster home where everything changed. She learned to walk, she realized she could hear, she went to school, and slowly, she left behind the life of chronic illness that her mother had invented.
She's been able to go on and have relationships, be employed, and have her own daughter who's healthy. It's kind of a miracle.
I'm sharing this because while we talk about the facts and the science around Munchausen by proxy, I don't want us to forget the human side. These aren't just cases. There are children behind the statistics. If you want to listen to more episodes of All in the Mind, you can find us on the ABC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to this channel and you'll get more on psychology and science.